Alright, so it's been over a year since Garmin launched their Connect Plus premium subscription, which offers additional features to the Garmin Connect platform. And this was a pretty big shift because Garmin's had a long history of not having any sort of paywall when it comes to health and fitness features. Now, Garmin did actually have premium subscriptions before this, with stuff like their Outdoor Maps product for enhanced maps, their InReach satellite service for their InReach devices, as well as some other services like their Vault cloud storage service for their car dash cams. But Connect Plus was something new for their watches, as well as their bike computers for that matter, which use the Garmin Connect app and platform. And this decision, well, it didn't necessarily go over well initially. But something probably important to bring up right now is that Connect Plus is completely optional, and these are all add-on features above and beyond what our devices already do. And these already do a lot straight out of the box. Like all my Garmin reviews of all their watches, as well as their bike computers, don't involve Connect Plus at all. So Connect Plus is really all about additional features that you may or may not even need. So that's really my aim in this video, is to go over everything that Connect Plus has to offer from day one when it first launched to now over a year later since they've added more features, and to give you my thoughts on if it's actually worth it. Alright, so first up when it comes to price, so it's going to be $6.99 per month or $69.99 per year if you're in the US, and then similar-ish pricing around the world. So let's talk about what you actually get for that money. So first off, when it comes to your profile photo, you get a star around it. And I know what you're thinking. That's pretty amazing, but don't worry, there's definitely more. So next up are exclusive badges that you can earn for accomplishing different things. And you can also earn more points. And some of these are also tied to other Connect Plus features, like let's say logging enough protein with their food and nutrition logging feature that we'll talk about in just one bit. So these perks are really there if you participate on the social level on Garmin Connect. And lots of people definitely use badges as well as competitions as extra motivation. So there's definitely that. But I also feel it's kind of weird to have some of these behind a paywall, especially with stuff like extra points. And then there's also their active intelligence feature. So these are little prompts that appear when you open the app and can provide suggestions based on our health and training stats. So like in the morning, it can give you a summary of your sleep stats and how you slept and recovered. After workouts, it can give you insights about how the workout went. And then later on in the day, it can also give you some summaries about how your day went. So I've collected an insane amount of screenshots of what their AI has told me over the last year. And it's kind of interesting what I found. So for wake up stats in the morning, it's usually just telling me what I already know if I were to just check my sleep score, my body battery, and my HRV status. So I haven't really seen much beyond what I already can see in those widgets, but I actually have also seen it suggest for me to take it easy if my energy levels are low. But at the same time, I can also see that reflected in my training readiness. But for something a little bit more interesting, on this morning, it had some more actionable information where it's bringing up the fact that my recent stress levels were kind of high over the last couple weeks. Now, I did actually know that I was stressed due to a few different things like a couple injuries, as well as an entire 14-hour day I spent editing a video, but I did actually appreciate this prompt coming up because it was a nice check-in and made me more aware of a trend that's been happening with my stress, which is something I usually wouldn't look at least from the data side of things. So I did actually appreciate this reminder because it was kind of like putting it top of mind. So now I can be more aware of it and see if I can do anything to reduce my stress. And then when it comes to the feedback after workouts, so on this run here, it said it contributed to my max aerobic capacity. And then all the information is really all the stuff I already know from my workout summary. And then after some rides, again, for the most part, it's bringing up stuff that I already knew from my workout summary. But then after this ride here, it brought up the fact that I maintained a cycling streak of 7 days. More interestingly is that it then suggested that I could possibly benefit from a warm-up and cool-down routine, and also look at incorporating other activities that could support my cycling. A little bit more interesting insight I saw is that it noticed that I wasn't really doing any high intensity efforts lately. So this was basically during the winter where I was basically doing a bunch of base miles and no specific workouts. So it was kind of interesting that I noticed that I was just kind of like zone 2ing it during the winter, and maybe you could step it up a bit in terms of intensity. And then when it comes to the evening insights, so I actually found these to be pretty useful for the most part, as well as actionable, where it would suggest the sleep duration. Like in this case, it noticed that my sleep wasn't that ideal over the last week and to get some more rest. I think the majority of the time it's usually just like summaries that I get, but there's definitely some interesting insights from time to time. So for the most part, I'd probably put this in the same boat as most other AI feedback that I get, where in general, it's telling me things I already know, but there's definitely times when it can provide some insights. And it's usually more on the historical side of things, where it can look back and tell me trends that may not necessarily be super obvious on the surface, which could make me more aware of certain things that may be going on. Additionally, though, it is also kind of putting a friendlier voice to all that data that our watches collect. We can already see all this information, of course, in our different stats, but it basically kind of adds a friendlier and more like personal connection, I guess you could say, to all that data. And then on the training feedback side of things, there's also their new performance dashboard feature. And I use the word new in quotes because while it's new, it's also sort of not new depending on how you look at it. So they used to have a customizable dashboard on Garmin Connect on the web where you could have different cards on the screen, which then you could dive in further to get more detail on that specific stat. And that went away at some point and was sort of replaced with their new Connect 5.0 layout. And then later on, they introduced this new performance dashboard. So the new part of this is that these new dashboards have way more information and also have an insane amount of customization. So you can choose from pretty much any stat that you want, compare that stat with pretty much any other stat that you want, go over all that information with whatever period of time that you want, and basically go full on super geek on anything that your watch or bike computer can collect. It's actually kind of crazy what you can do with it and how much detail that you can actually see here. So while they definitely did remove the old dashboard cards that we had before at some point before Connect Plus came out, there's a lot more functionality with these new performance dashboards, but I suppose this is an item that's debatable whether it's actually new or not new depending on how you look at it. And then Connect Plus also adds a couple capabilities to their LiveTrack feature. Now, even without Connect Plus, LiveTrack works on all our devices as long as we have our phone with us and have a cell phone connection where an email can be sent to our contacts with a link where they can follow along during our activity. And then you can also do this without a phone if you have a Phoenix 8 Pro over LTE. The Connect Plus part of LiveTrack, though, adds the capability of also sending a text message to a contact in addition to the email. So again, emailing a LiveTrack link is still totally free. It's just the additional text message that requires Connect Plus. The second part of this, though, is that you can also set up a personalized LiveTrack web page with Connect Plus with a customized web address which has all your LiveTrack activities. So kind of like your own Strava page for your activities. And then they also offer more coaching guidance with Connect Plus. So this is additional content that you get on top of the Garmin Coach plans that you already get for free with your device. And what I found is that these are usually little explainer videos or articles about how the coaching programs work and what to expect with each training plan. So these basically add a little bit more context. I don't necessarily see a ton of value in these, but in all fairness, the Garmin Coach plans themselves, which are actually pretty good, are already totally free with your device. Now, moving on to a feature which I do think is very useful is their live activities feature, which mirrors the information being collected on our watch to our phone, but there's actually a lot more to it than just that. Now, for the mirroring part, this can be super useful for lots of different kinds of workouts, especially for stuff like weight training and high intensity interval training where we can be gripping onto something which can make it kind of like hard to look at our watch. Beyond that though, for weight training specifically, if we use the strength training profile, our watches can attempt to automatically count our reps. Sometimes it works great, sometimes it doesn't. So in the case that it doesn't, we may need to edit our rep count. So we can do that on our watch, of course, but with this live activities feature, we can also do that on the phone, which may be a little bit more convenient. But it's not just for reps. So our watches can also attempt to identify what actual exercise that we're doing. And again, sometimes it knows what we're doing and sometimes it doesn't, but we can also adjust these in real time on the app itself during the workout. And this isn't something that you can do on the watch during the workout. So this makes it so you can edit these on the fly where it has some suggestions of what exercise it thinks we did, but then we can also search for specific ones if it's not listed. But this is definitely far easier to do during the workout, I found, versus having to do this after the workout where we may forget. Now, some other brands also do have an activity mirroring feature for free, like let's say Apple, Google, as well as Chorus. However, caveat with Apple and Google is that the mirroring is only available for pretty specific workouts. And then with Chorus, their mirroring feature actually has some pretty cool functionality with outdoor workouts like with navigation, which is actually really cool to see how that works. I suppose the unique part of Garmin's implementation though is probably the weight training interface, but either way, the mirroring functionality does differ between all these brands in kind of one way or another. But when it comes to the features that I actually do use, this is one of those features, especially when I'm doing stuff like high intensity interval training. I don't really use the rep counting and auto detection all that much other than just for like testing purposes, but I do find the data mirroring feature to be super useful to see my heart rate and timers. So those are all the features that came with Connect Plus when it first launched, but now let's talk about all the features they've added since then. And the first is their Trails Plus feature. So in May of 2025, Garmin rolled out their Garmin Trails feature, where they have popular trails and routes that you can see in Garmin Connect, and these are basically curated trails from crowdsourced data. So these are generally more popular trails where we can rate these trails and also add photos. So this is where we can get an idea of how good these trails may be before heading out. And these can definitely be super useful, especially in an area that we're not familiar with, for getting an idea of an exact route that may be more popular versus creating a route on the fly. So that part is actually all free for any Garmin user. The Connect Plus part of it, or maybe the Trails Plus part of it, I guess, is that Trails Plus allows us to push those exact routes to our watch, and then also allows us to customize those routes. It's just the capability of quickly sending those pre-built routes to your device. That's for Connect Plus subscribers. And then another trail related feature they added are 3D maps. So this adds another view to maps in Garmin Connect, where this basically adds a lot more context to elevation. And in terms of usefulness, super useful, just so we have a better understanding of the terrain. We can definitely already see elevation gain and loss when creating a route, as well as topographical information, but seeing if a route is in a valley versus a ridgeline or somewhere in between is definitely much easier to visualize with 3D maps. And then around the end of 2025, they also rolled out their Garmin Connect Rundown, which is basically this end of year summary with all your stats and achievements throughout the year. So very much like a Spotify Unwrapped sort of thing, and also very similar to Strava's Year in Sport. I think the interesting part of this, though, versus something like Strava's Year in Sport, is that this also includes health stats like our sleep and body battery scores, which is kind of interesting to see. And unfortunately, I can't actually show you mine because I swear I screen recorded my rundown, but apparently I messed up somewhere or accidentally deleted it, and it disappears after January. So unfortunately, I can't really show you mine. So sorry about that. But for the part where this is only for Connect Plus subscribers, well, I guess Strava's Year in Sport is also just for Strava subscribers. So I guess there's that. And then comes their latest feature, and probably the biggest Connect Plus feature they've added so far, their food and nutrition logging right in Garmin Connect. So before, you could actually do this, but it required using MyFitnessPal and then syncing that to Garmin Connect. Now it's done natively, but there's also additional functionality where it can suggest a calorie target based on nutrition goals, and can also be dynamic based on your activities. So with Garmin's implementation, there's functionality like allowing you to scan for different barcodes for different food items. It can try to identify food based on a photo. You can create custom foods. We can have different meal windows. We can track the distribution of our macros, and most of the fundamentals that you find on other apps. Now, there's definitely a lot of other apps that offer more functionality than what Garmin has currently. So if you're looking for the most advanced food and nutrition tracking out there, there's definitely other apps that may do a better job. But some of the other options also do have subscriptions tied to them, and then some free versions often have ads. But food and nutrition is obviously pretty personal, and some of us may not need this at all. Some of us may need every detail possible, and then some of us may be in between. And I'm kind of one of those in between people where I just want general tracking and knowing I'm in the right ballpark, and it does that for me. It basically just gives me a good idea of what I'm consuming, which is definitely always enlightening to see how calories add up throughout the day, but it also helps me understand macro distribution, especially when it comes to getting enough protein, and also how sugar adds up so quickly. Like Des, stay away from the cookies. What I particularly like about this, though, is that how it can integrate with the data collected from my watch, where it can automatically adjust my calorie target based on my workouts and activities. So this is where it can be dynamic. All right, so with all that, what are my thoughts about Connect Plus after a year since it came out? Well, in terms of the initial features, again, can't really say those were all that compelling when it first launched. Maybe the only exception being the indoor activity mirroring feature, which can definitely be nice for indoor workouts. But when it comes to the new features, well, I think 3D Maps is a good one when it comes to route planning, like super useful in the hills for sure. And for it being a premium feature, well, this is similar to Strava, where 3D Maps on Strava are only for Strava subscribers. However, Chorus and Suunto have 3D Maps for free. But when it comes to the food and nutrition tracking feature, well, I think this could be the tipping point feature for some of us if we're interested in tracking our macros. Again, there are definitely other apps out there that we can get for free which can do this, and some of them can also do it much better. In my particular case, I don't necessarily need super detailed tracking, and I want more of a general idea, and it provides that. Plus, I'm trying to reduce the amount of app clutter and managing different accounts and stuff like that, so I do like that it's built right in, and of course that it integrates with my Garmin. However, with that being said, there's definitely a lot of features that this needs, like let's say creating custom recipes. There's definitely a lot more that can be done with this, and if they can build out the functionality so it's more in line with other food tracking apps out there, that would definitely make Connect Plus much more compelling for those of us looking for this kind of feature. So I have to say that at first it was a struggle to see the value with Connect Plus, but now over a year later, they definitely added more features and some more value. But getting back to that bad S word that we all don't like, and the fact that it's an add-on subscription. So there's actually good and bad with subscriptions. The bad, it's a monthly fee that we have to keep on paying month after month to use these features. the good. We really only have to commit for a month at most if we find we don't really need these features. And that's actually where it's kind of interesting. So for me, I did find that food tracking feature worth it for my particular needs, but after tracking for a while now, well, I have a good routine down and I have a good idea of how my meals add up. So I've actually stopped using the food tracking feature now that I have a routine that's kind of nailed down. So that's where with Connect Plus, yes, it is yet another subscription, but it is totally optional depending on our needs. And there's definitely a lot of other smaller line items in though, which I think are kind of just there to make the list look longer, but I think they should really focus on bigger and more compelling features, so it's a little bit more clear for us to see where the value is coming from. And like I was mentioning, if they can expand their food tracking feature to be more on par with other apps out there, that would definitely make it a lot more worth it. Now, even though some of these additional features are only available with Connect Plus, one thing I do have to mention is that they did actually recently add the revamped gear tracking feature to all Garmin users without a subscription. So this is actually a pretty great feature, not only for shoe tracking, but also tons of other stuff like, let's say, bikes and individual components. And I've got another video all about that you can check out once you're done over here to see what that's all about. So it's not necessarily like every new Garmin Connect feature is behind the paywall. Anyhow, those are just my thoughts about Connect Plus after a year, and I'm sure many of you have thoughts about it as well, so definitely drop those down in the comment section. And if you found the information in this video to be useful, just do me a favor and hit that like button, and also be on the lookout for tons more videos that are dropping soon. In the meantime, have fun out there, and we will see you in the next video.